Good morning and welcome to our discussion on principles of economics once again. And we were discussing about saving, investment, and financial systems, right? Now, if you recall, we said that in the previous chapter we discussed that uh, investment is basically required for capital formulation and capital is required for economic growth, but not always the person who wants to invest has the required source or money. So, therefore, the person, on the other hand, there are people who would have money but they don't want to invest, rather, they would prefer saving. So, therefore, we need a system that will match borrowers' demand for saving with the savers' uh, requirement of saving, and that is the rule of financial institutions and financial markets. We said that basically in the financial system we have financial markets like bond market, stock market, and then we have financial intermediaries like banks, mutual funds, pension schemes, so on and so forth. So, role of this financial institution is basically to match the demand and supply of something called loanable fund, the fund required for the investment. Now, in our previous session, we discussed about the preliminaries of this uh, saving, investment, and financial systems. And today, what we are going to discuss is saving investment in a national income accounting system. So if you recall that when we discussed about GDP is the measure of nation's income. So we got this identity y equals to C plus I plus G, where C equals to consumption expenditure, I is investment, G is the government spending, and NX is the net export. So export minus import, assuming that the country is an open economy. So in a closed economy system, we get this type of identity y equals to C plus I plus G. There is no NX component here because when the country is closed, there is no export, no import. And then that means from the identity y equals to C plus I plus G, we can easily understand that investment is basically y minus C minus G. National income minus consumption minus government expenditure. But the left side of this identity is basically what is this? Y is the total income. And if you subtract consumption and government expenditure, what do you get actually? From total income, if you subtract these two, basically you would be getting something called saving or national saving. Very easy to understand. So the left side of the equation is basically total income in the economy after paying for consumption and government expenditure, government purchase. So that is nothing but national saving. So we can say that then from this, if you substitute S for Y minus C minus G, then we will get S equals to I, right? So national saving or saving is equals to S equals to I, or what you can do is basically we can write then S equals to Y minus C minus G, right? So if you subtract and add capital T, what we are doing, look at this, we are adding and subtracting T. So S equals to, then we can write Y minus T minus C plus T minus G. So the identity is same because I have just added and subtracted capital T. What is capital T here? Capital T is basically the government's total tax revenue. Now this identity is very important, so you have to keep in mind carefully about these two components of the saving identity. The first component is y minus t minus c. What is this? So y is the total income of the economy, t is the total tax that you pay, and c is the consumption expenditure. So we can easily understand then y minus t minus c is basically a measure of saving. But who is saving? Saving is for all the households in the economy, all the firms in the economy. That is why y minus t minus c is called private saving in the economy. And then what is t minus g? See, t is basically the government's total tax revenue. So we can think of indirectly, then t is government's income. And if you subtract g, government expenditure, so t minus g is government saving. So that means the first component is private saving and second component is government saving. Sometimes it is called public saving also. So private and public saving together constitute the national saving. Okay. So national saving is that means total income in the economy that remains after paying for consumption and government expenditure. So look at the private saving component, as I said, is the amount of income that households have left after paying for their taxes. So y minus t minus c is basically the household consumption or household saving, which is known as private saving. And public saving, as I said, government tax revenue minus the government expenditure t minus g. So one thing we have to understand, when the t is greater than g, that means government is actually having a surplus. Okay, total tax revenue, government earning is more than government expenditure. So we call it government is running a budget surplus. Okay, the surplus t minus g basically represents public saving. Okay, it's very easy to understand when the government's income is more than the government purchase. So we can say that means government is having some kind of saving, and this is called public saving. And then g minus t, if the g government purchase is more than t, that means government is basically running a budget deficit because it is spending more money than it receives as a tax revenue. So the economy as a whole, saving must be equals to investment, because my saving is your investment. You cannot invest more than what I save. So if you take the economy as a whole, then saving must be equals to investment all the time. That is the saving income identity. And the financial markets, as I told you earlier also, coordinates economy saving and investment in the market, which is called market for loanable fund. Those who want to invest, they will come to this loanable fund market and they will borrow fund. Those who want to save, they will also come to this loanable market. They will save their money and enjoy rate of interest. So the market for loanable fund is basically the market in which those who wants to save, they will supply the loanable fund, and those who wants to borrow, they will in demand for loanable fund. So loanable funds refers to all income that people have chosen to save and lend out, okay, rather than use their own consumption. So after meeting my consumption, I prefer to save some amount of money. So basically, I am sacrificing my present consumption so as to enjoy the rate of interest so that I can sustain my future consumption. That is the idea. So the amount of money what I save is basically the supply of loanable fund. And it comes from the extra income that the people might be having. And the demand for loanable fund comes from either from the households or from firms that wish to borrow and make investment. For example, as an individual, I can borrow money from bank and I can buy a house, or I can invest in my child's education, or I can buy a land, or I can do some my own small business, so on and so forth. And the firms also wish to borrow from this loanable fund and make investment. And interest rate is basically, you have to understand, this loanable fund market also, we will discuss that this is like any other market, like market for ice cream, tomato, potato, rice, whatever, cotton sarts. Like the market demand and supply we have discussed earlier, when we come to the loanable fund market, there also will get a demand for loanable fund, supply of loanable fund, and the interaction or intersection between demand and supply will give you equilibrium rate of interest. Okay, so interest rate is the price of the loanable fund, the amount that borrowers pay for loans and the amount that lenders receive on their saving. In the market for loanable fund, the real interest rate actually matters. Okay, so intersection of demand and supply will determine the price of any commodity. We have seen earlier, you have a demand curve downward sloping, you have a supply curve downward upward sloping, and the intersection between demand and supply will determine equilibrium price. Okay, so here also equilibrium uh, rate of interest, which we call as a price of loanable fund. Okay, the equilibrium financial market, as I said, it works like any other markets in the economy. The equilibrium of the supply and demand for loanable funds determines the real interest rate. And we can take this example. Let's look at this demand and supply of loanable fund, and then this is basically the equilibrium rate of interest is 5%, wherein let us assume that there is a total demand and supply of 1200 billion dollars. Okay, 1200 is the equilibrium loanable fund available. Now, what determines basically the supply and demand for loanable fund? Now, this is again like our demand and supply, that market mechanism that we have discussed earlier. So, there are public policies, as we said, that public policies can actually determine the demand and supply of loanable fund. So, what are those? Taxes and saving, taxes and investment, and then government budget deficit and surplus. We will discuss this basically tax and government budget deficit. These are the three important policies that can actually determine equilibrium demand and supply of loanable fund. So let us say that first policy is some saving incentive. Okay, saving incentive. So what type of saving investment? So if the government reduces the taxes on interest income, okay, so when we save our money, we enjoy interest rate. If you keep money in bank gives us interest, but that interest earned is also taxable, right? So that means when I say I get very less incentive if the tax rate is very high on my interest income. What is the fun of saving money? Because you have to remember one thing, that when I'm saving, I'm sacrificing my present consumption. So why I am sacrificing? So that I can enjoy interest rate. But if the tax is imposed on that interest rate, that means I have very less incentive to sacrifice my present consumption. That is why tax on interest income substantially reduce the future payoff, okay, from the current saving, and that may reduce the incentive to save, right? Now what the government can do, government to increase the saving, actually government can reduce the tax rate. That will give incentive for the households to save at any given interest rate. The supply of loanable fund, then what will happen, the supply of loanable fund will shift rightward, because now more people wants to save. Okay, and if there is more loanable fund available, then what will happen to interest rate, interest rate will go down, and quantity demanded for loanable fund also will increase, because those who wants to borrow, they will see, since there is a lower interest rate, they can borrow more and more, right? So if you take this demand and supply, let's say this is the equilibrium. Now government has reduced the tax rate on interest income, so supply card will shift upward. Okay, look at this. Supply curve is shifting from S1 to S2 because of this tax incentive, right? And then the moment supply increases, like any other market, we can understand the price will fall. So earlier it was, interest rate was 5%, now it is 4%. So at that interest rate, now the equilibrium rate of interest is 4%, and you see the supply of loanable fund has increased from 1200 to 1600. So equilibrium quantity of loanable fund demanded as well as supplied increased. Okay, so this raises the equilibrium quantity of loanable fund that can happen due to a tax cut on interest income. So sometimes government gives this type of incentive for tax saving. Okay, government will say that if you invest in this project, sometimes of the government does actually, government will say that there is a lock-in period. So if you put your money for 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years, within that period you may not be able to withdraw that money to enjoy this tax saving, and you will be able to enjoy only after the lock-in period. But whatever be the case, in this particular example, we understand that how a tax cut on uh, interest income can actually increase the demand and supply of loanable fund. So if a change in tax law encourages greater saving, the result will be lower interest rate and greater investment. Now, this is policy number 2, which is an investment incentive. So when the government feels that there is not private investment happening, what the government can announce, that if the firm buys a new factory or buy a new machine, okay, for new investment, government can give some kind of tax incentive. Sometimes government give subsidy, or sometimes they can give some kind of tax cut on this new investment. So an investment tax credit basically increases the incentive to borrow. Let's say earlier it was 12% whenever you buy some kind of new equipment. As we know that in Indian context we have to pay some GST. But let's say now government is saying, if this is new investment, then instead of 18%, you have to pay some 12% of GST. So that tax cut on this new investment will increase basically the demand for loanable fund. So demand curve will shift rightward, and when there is more demand, what will happen? Interest rate will go up. Okay, and when the interest rate goes up, then people will be able to save more also, because more is the interest rate. People will feel that it is better to save rather than consuming, right? So that's why this particular policy will lead to demand for loanable fund, and rate of interest will go up. As a result, saving will also increase. Look at this using the diagram. This is the diagram once again. So when there is a tax cut, incentive on new investment, demand curve will shift rightward. Look at this. So demand curve is shifting from D1 to D2, and then what is happening? Interest rate goes up from 5% to 6%, and again the equilibrium loanable fund increases from $1,200 billion to $1,400 billion. So demand and supply both are increasing. Demand is increasing because the investors are now getting some kind of tax credit, okay, tax credit on new investment, and supply is also increasing because as interest rate goes up, so supply is an upward sloping function, so it is a positive function of rate of interest rate. That is why saving is also increasing. Okay, so it raises the quantity of loanable fund. That is how it works. Now, this last policy is very important, government budget deficit or budget surplus. So, this word budget deficit, what is budget actually? Budget is basically a financial plan. Like you and me, all of us at our family level, we have our some kind of plan, right? What we will do in next year, we make a financial plan that this much would be our earning, and then based on our future earning for the next year, let us say that the household they are planning what should be the type of expenditure. So that is called budget. At the same way, at the country level also, government plans for the next year financial statement about basically income and expenditure. So budget is nothing but an income and expenditure statement for the next financial, that is called budget. Now, at the household level, generally, we try to keep our expenditure lower than our income, generally. So, our income is mostly more than our expenditure. But at the economy level, there is no guarantee that government will always have more income than it actually spends. Rather, the opposite things happens. So, government expenditure is mostly more than the income. And what is government income? Government income is T, and what is government expenditure? That is G. So if the T is greater than G, that means government's tax revenue is more than government expenditure, and if that is the case, government will run a surplus in the budget. That is called budget surplus. T is greater than G. But opposite thing may also happen when the government income T is actually less than G. So we call it is a government budget deficit. When there is a budget deficit, what the government will do? Government will borrow from the again loanable fund. So earlier in the loanable fund market, only the private players were borrowing. Now, because of this government deficit, budget deficit, government is now coming and competing with the private players. How the government will compete? Government will issue new bonds. Sometimes you see that government is issuing infrastructure bond, many other type of bonds. And bond, what is bond? Bond is basically, if you recall, we discussed that bond is basically a financial certificate. And there are three important features. What are those? Basically, what is the length of maturity? Whether it is a short-term bond or long-term bond, depending on the length of maturity. Then what is the face value? Whether it is 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, what is the face value of the bond? And then thirdly, what is the maturity amount? Okay, maturity amount and the credit risk. What is the risk involved in that bond? These are a couple of features that define the financial certificate as bond, and government will issue those bonds and then borrow the money from the market, from the loanable fund. Now we will see what will happen to the demand and supply of loanable fund in both the cases. Case 1, government runs a budget surplus. Case 2, government runs a budget deficit. So when the government spends more than it receives as tax revenue, as I say, this is the shortfall in income is called budget deficit. And the accumulation of all the past budget deficit is called government debt. Okay, government debt. So government borrowing to finance its budget deficit, what will happen? As I said, it will reduce the supply of loanable funds, because if you once again go back to our previous equation, saving equals to y minus t minus c plus t minus g. So the first component was private saving, second component was public saving. So if the t minus g is negative, that means when it is t is less than g, it is negative, means what is happening? National saving is going down, supply of loanable fund is going down. So what will happen? So reduces the supply of loanable funds available to finance for investment by households and firms. So this fall in investment is referred to crowding out, because now government is also competing with the private players, and that is called crowding out. A fall in investment, please keep in mind, a fall in investment due to government's participation also in the loanable fund market is called crowding out of investment. So the deficit borrowing crowds out private borrowers who are trying to finance their investment. So a budget deficit basically decreases the supply of loanable fund, and what will happen? Shift the supply curve leftward. Rate of interest will go up and reduces the equilibrium quantity of loanable fund. Look at this. So this is the equilibrium condition. 5% is the rate of interest. $1,200 is the total loanable fund. Now when there is a deficit, the supply curve will shift upward, and what will happen when the supply curve shifts upward? Look at this. Look at this. So rate of interest is 6%, and now the investment loanable fund also goes down, demand and supply, from $1,200 billion to $800 billion. So this reduction in loanable fund supply is basically, that means fall in investment by $400 billion, and that is called crowding out effect. Okay, reduces equilibrium quantity of loanable fund when government also comes in and compete with the private players. What will happen to government deficit and surplus then? When the government reduces national saving, as I said, running a deficit means interest rate rises and investment falls. Opposite thing will happen when there is a surplus. Very easy to understand. Okay, so instead of, if you go back to this diagram, when there is a surplus, that means t minus g is positive, the supply curve will shift rightward, there will be fall in rate of interest, and then there will be increase in equilibrium demand and supply of loanable fund. So a budget surplus increases the supply of loanable fund, and what will happen to interest rate? Interest rate will go down and the investment will go up. So now if we summarize, we can easily understand that a financial system of an economy basically is made up of financial institutions such as the bond market, the stock markets, the banks, and the finance mutual fund. This is called financial system. Okay, financial system. What are the elements? Financial institutions. Okay, basically financial intermediaries and financial market. So bond market, stock market, they are called financial market, and then banks and mutual funds, they are called financial intermediaries. What is the role? The role of all these financial institutions is basically to match the borrower's demand with the saver's supply of loanable fund. Okay, sometimes the savers can directly supply the loanable fund to the investors, like as I said, when we invest in stock markets, what happens? So we directly invest in a particular company. That means we are directly supplying loanable fund. But when you are saving in banks or in mutual funds, then we are indirectly supplying loanable fund to the investors. So all these institutions, they act to direct the resources of households who wants to save some of their income into the hands of households and firms who want to grow. And then national income accounting identities reveal some important relationship. That means when we say that y equals to c plus I plus g, assuming in a closed economy, then if we take y minus c minus g, then we will get investment. So investment is nothing but y minus c minus g, and that is also y minus c minus g is nothing but saving. So that means that is how we get saving and investment identity. And then from that saving and investment identity, the moment I said that saving is nothing but y minus c minus g, if you subtract and add t over there, then what we will get y minus c minus t plus t minus g. So that means we will get two components of national saving: private saving made by the households and the public saving made by the government. Okay, so financial institutions basically attempt to match one person's saving with another person's investment. And then when we talk about loanable fund, what we discussed, that it is basically the demand and supply of loanable fund. And like any other market, this demand and supply of loanable fund intersection determines the equilibrium rate of interest. Okay, equilibrium rate of interest. The supply of loanable fund comes from the households who want to save some of their income, and the demand for loanable fund comes from some of the households who wants to borrow for their own investment. And as we discussed, national saving equals to private saving plus public saving. And the moment government has some budget deficit, then that will reduce the loanable fund. T minus G is negative. When there is a reduction in supply of loanable fund, what will happen? Supply curve will shift leftward, rate of interest will go up, and investment will fall. That is called crowding out of private investment when there is a government budget deficit, because of that situation, government also will compete with the private players in the loanable fund market. Okay, so when a government budget deficit crowds out investment, it reduces basically the growth of productivity and GDP. It is very simple to understand, because y equals to c plus I plus g. Now, because of this budget deficit, what is happening? Government is competing with the private players. Interest rate is going up, investment falls. So when I falls, obviously GDP will also fall. Lack of investment means lack of production, productivity. Without investment, without capital formation, we discussed earlier that productivity will be low. You should have machines, you should have plants. So laborers would need plants and machinery to work, but there is no fund available. Government is running deficit, government is also borrowing. With this, we are closing our discussion today, and we'll again meet in our next class. Thank you.